In today's episode of Crawlspace, we speak with private investigator Joe Dalu. And Lance, this is a really great conversation about his work, his background. We get into stalking, and he tells us some stories. What'd you think of this conversation?
I love that we have these people on. This is all a result of CrimeCon. We could go on and on about how much we enjoy meeting new people when we get together in this community that we have. And Joe is a new friend of the show, introduced to us by an old friend of the show, Laura Petler. You're right. He talks to us about stalking. He finally gives us about as clear of an answer as we can expect when we're trying to figure out what exactly qualifies as stalking, because we've had this question come up. We've had guests come on who have been stalked. They've had protective orders against the people who have stalked them. But there's always this gray area about well, what exactly is stalking and when does it become something more? When does it escalate? And he very articulately breaks that down for us and for the listeners. So super educational conversation.
And you may recognize Joe from an episode of Dateline about the murder of Jeffrey Hammond. And you can find out more about Joe on his website at pgiexecutives.com. He is the president and owner of Premier Group International, which is an investigative and security corporation. So we hope you enjoy this conversation.
We're going to break real quick for commercial, and we will be right back with Mr. Joe Dalu. And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Welcome to the podcast, Joe Dalu. Joe, how are you today?
Good. Feeling really good. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me on.
We are excited to have you on. We met you at CrimeCon. We have a mutual friend in common, and she was kind enough to introduce us. But before we get into all of this, can you just introduce yourself to the listeners? Then we can get into some specifics on some of these cases that you've worked on.
Absolutely. I was a police officer for 16 years before I medically retired. At that point, I opened up an investigation and security company. The security is primarily towards the entertainment industry, executive, high-level production, CEOs, public officials, and so forth. And then investigations anywhere from workers' comp and domestic cases all the way to white-collar cold case files. I've been doing that for about 25 years. We do specialize in threat assessments, threat management, stalking investigations as well. And it's something that I've just enjoyed doing since my retirement. It kind of makes me feel like I'm still in the family of Blue, and really enjoy it. Meet some great people.
Very cool. And the mutual friend that I mentioned is the great Laura Petler. Phenomenal person. It's always cool when she recommends us meeting somebody, because in her way, she's got her vetting process. So you know by the time you've been introduced that you've passed that test, which is always a great feeling.
Yeah, and it's a good feeling knowing that the people she's introducing me to as well has been approved of that vetting process and are good people, because we want to associate ourselves with professionals, people that are like-minded and have the same type of objective for anything that we do. And Laura, let me tell you, she's been phenomenal. I had the pleasure and opportunity to work with her on a staged homicide-suicide case, and it was just, I learned so much from her as well.
One thing that stood out when we were being introduced and you went into your past and what you do and where your expertise lies is the topic of stalking. You know a lot about stalking, and just coincidentally, well, no, not coincidentally, because we cover true crime, Tim and I have covered stories recently, and even years ago too, we've covered stories that involve stalking. It was recent where him and I would start to have these conversations outside of recording, like how do you even qualify something as stalking? When does it become stalking? So it was kind of lucky timing that we met you right on the heels of having these conversations about a young woman who actually filed a restraining order, and then the time elapsed on that restraining order, and the guy was just showing up at a soccer game, showing up at her public place, but not doing anything. And we're always well, what is that stalking? How much gray is there in stalking?
I think there's a lot of gray depending on the state, and it's up to law enforcement, number one, to be educated, because a lot of times when someone feels that they're being stalked, it very well can be, but does it have all the elements? For instance, in California, it's repeated following or harassing, and there has to be a credible threat. And credible threat is where I think the gray area is for us. In the direct threat, it was, I'm going to kill you, something like that. Credible threat is, would it put a reasonable and prudent person in a state of fear? It's somewhat gray in the area of how do they perceive that statement, or how do they perceive a threat? It could be just following them to work. We did a case one time where a box of donuts showed up on the doorstep of a female victim. And she thought that was really weird because it was from the donut place that she had gone to the day before, which in her mind is she was followed there and they know exactly what donut place she had visited. So that really brought in the fear. And that was a long case in that the victim, there was two victims, same suspect. One was for 20 years and the other one was for 10 years. And like I tell most of my clients is, if you're a victim of stalking, there's a good chance it's going to last forever or a very, very long time.
Now, is that tough to prove, though, that this person went to this donut shop the day before, and just because they received a gift of donuts, I suppose, doesn't always mean that they were followed there? Like, how is...
And that's a good question. So you're building a case, really. That one incident is going to be suspicious to anyone who hears it. Well, that is, and it could very well be a coincidence. But what you're going to have is a pattern of conduct. So typical variations of conduct that is creating a pattern of stalking or harassing. That might be flowers, gifts left on the doorstep. So multiple unwanted, unsolicited gifts. But now we have a credible threat, which would be, hey, this person must be following me. Yes, it is a coincidence, but it's not outside his pattern of conduct. We have a consistent pattern where he's leaving gifts. At one point, I left a note on the door stating, please don't leave any more gifts, and yet they're still doing it. So we have the harassing. We have the potential of repeated following as it pertains to California law. Just did a case here in Utah, very different in that the person filing the complaint, the threshold for stalking is practically nothing. It just, they fill out a complaint, they make their allegations, and they're issued a temporary restraining order based on whatever they put down. The threshold here in California is going to be a lot. Like that paperwork was 4 pages, where our paperwork typically for a complaint is going to be a couple hundred pages at least, because we're going to be gathering text messages, photos, evidence, pictures of the gifts, things of that nature, because we want to be able to show an example of what, if anyone reading this, they're going to look and go, God, that is a lot of gifts. And this person, they don't even know who it is, or they have an idea who it is. It's someone, a former employee, a former neighbor, a former partner. So it could be a number of things. And then we break those stalking typologies down so we better understand what we're dealing with as well.
Do you ever have a situation where you monitor the stalking?
Yes, that's called threat management. So what we recommend oftentimes, depending on the type of stalking it is. So let's say it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, they break up, and the boyfriend is stalking the girlfriend. As much as we can understand about the victim, we want to know more so of or equally of the stalker. Former or prior criminal history, a history of mental health, maybe within the family, substance abuse, any catastrophic events, maybe a traffic collision where there is severe head trauma. We want to look at financials. Is there any outside stressors with work, family? Who's the support mechanism? Once we understand that, and then we understand the victim, what they're going through, what they're experiencing. And typically, I don't discard what the victim is going through or feels or their instinct. I have to take all their instinct. They know that person better than anybody. So the more I gather from them and what their instinct, I just go, well, that's probably not anything, but I take it in and digest it and go, okay, well, let's put that on the back burner, and maybe that'll come in handy later. Once we get an idea of what we're dealing with, then we would look at, in this particular case, as that example, it would be what we call a simple obsession, where there's a prior relationship between the stalker and their victim. And those have a tendency to be more dangerous. Right? Those are domestic violence situations. A lot of times we see last resort thinking, which is, if I can't have you, nobody can have you. And then the other type is what we typically see in celebrities, which is the love obsession. They're just obsessed with this person of who they think they are on television, or they're just obsessed at their looks and their acting and their public image. And then we have what we call erotomatic. Those are the ones where they believe they're in a relationship with the victim. and they may never even have met the victim, knew the victim. They just seen them, and all of a sudden, which is the case that I believe I was talking with you, they didn't necessarily believe that they were in a relationship, but I think in this particular case, the victim or the suspect believed that if they did have a relationship, something would come out of that. So it was like it kind of borderlines between the love obsession, actually all three. We can get into that later on. Does that answer your question?
It definitely clarifies it. It definitely opens up the educational aspect of what we like to talk about here, because stalking is just such a all-encompassing word when you're dealing with these types of crimes and you're dealing with abductions and assaults and murders and domestic abuse. Stalking is always just kind of there, and some people don't, and we've, probably not used it correctly as well, but that gray area will never not be gray.
When you say will never not be gray, meaning that if it could fall into so many other categories?
Right. And I think like the only time it becomes definite is when the action is made, like the thing has been done.
And it has to consist of all the elements. Otherwise, you have different types of crime. For instance, if I'm not following somebody, because remember, it has to be repeated harassing and or following per the penal code. So if it has just a harassing, yes, you could have stalking to a certain degree, but where's the threat then? If there's no direct threat, what is a credible threat? If it's just emails or things being posted on social media, things like that. So you do have to have that element of credible threat. The credible threat is what's going to be hard to really define. And because what you may perceive as a threat, somebody else would go, that's just ridiculous. Why would you even think that? If it was where you have all the elements involved and someone says, okay, at least in the next week, I'd consider sleeping with one eye open. Now that's going to send chills, right? Doesn't mean the person's capable or has the means and opportunity to do that, but it certainly, I think anyone would go, well, what do you mean by that? That's got to be some threat. Something going to happen to me at night when I sleep? They're going to come into my house? And then you have to worry about the other victims that are potentially being exposed to that risk.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
And in a scenario like what you just described, would you recommend getting a protective or a restraining order for the person being stalked?
That is a very, very good question. And let me take you back a little bit. Rebecca Schaefer was murdered by Robert Bardo. And at that point is when people really became aware of stalking, the dangers of stalking, especially someone in the public entertainment industry. A lot of things came in light of that. One, if you are familiar with the case, a private investigator found her address through the DMV. I believe I was out of Arizona. And then Robert Bardo took that information and traveled. Once he did that, I believe the first point of contact was knocking on her door, asked for an autograph. But then he came back a second time, and that's when she was murdered. LAPD lawmakers decided to go, hey, we need some type of stalking law. And that's when it was repeated following, harassing, and a direct threat. Now, Rhonda Saunders, a former prosecutor in Los Angeles, later on found the need to change the direct threat to a credible threat because it could mean different things. And she provides an example in her book that states there was a domestic violence case, suspect was arrested at the scene, and he turned to look at his wife before he was put in the police car, and he says, don't worry, baby, when I get back, I'll take you to Vegas. Well, a year before that, in Las Vegas, he nearly beat her to death. So her perceived threat was, he's going to kill me. That's exactly what that statement means. That's primarily why she wanted that law specific, apart from direct threat to credible threat. At the same time, when this occurred, John Lane and LAPD decided to start their threat management unit, which was a specified unit that would look at the stalking cases primarily for the entertainment industry because there was so much of it. It's very unusual. And that's where the case studies and the laws came from that, their expertise. So they're the kind of founder on stalking. John Lane, Greg Bowles, they ran that unit over the course of time. When law enforcement would get called for someone saying, hey, I'm being harassed or stalked, a lot of times, and they still do it today, they'll say, well, just block them. John Lane's belief at the time when this unit first started, as typically it would be for law enforcement, would be, well, why don't you just get a restraining order? John started to see, as he worked closer with the private sector and with the high level, for many reasons why they don't necessarily want a restraining order themselves as a victim. And it could be for bad PR, doesn't make any sense, but they have a number of reasons, and some of them are very good reasons. The primary good reason is it may exacerbate the situation. So if you have a celebrity, let's say it's Brad Pitt, for example, and he has a stalker. If they rush to judgment and say, well, let's just get a restraining order every time someone's getting stalked, that person might look at that legal document and say, oh my gosh, my name is on the same paper as Brad Pitt. It excites him. It's like, oh my God, this is a legal document. We have a connection. So if you don't understand the typology and you rush to it, you don't understand anything about the victim, the mental illness, their prior criminal history, if any, and you don't gather maybe support mechanisms around there, you could rush, which exacerbate the situation when it's not needed. And you could find through other means that maybe at least it will suppress or mitigate the risk, or they'll direct their attention to someone else. Getting a restraining order it must be evaluated each and every case. And it's up to the person conducting the threat assessment, law enforcement, and the victim to all kind of find out what's going to be the best case once they understand the parties involved and who they're dealing with and typologies.
And it also seems like the reaction, if that order is granted, the reaction of the stalker can vary pretty widely.
Yes, it can. And remember, we tell this to our clients, that it's just a piece of paper. Now, at the same time, what goes from a misdemeanor stalking to a felony stalking and maybe to federal stalking, these are all things that we need to consider. And if you're building a case of someone that you're going to have a problem with for a very long time due to mental illness, you could arrest them and file charges. But is it really doing good if the mental illness is not addressed? I think a lot of us, what we do in our industry is in networking, education, and training, what do we need to focus on in changing? Maybe enhance some laws that are already on the book, create some, but also address the mental illness. And in the recent training that we just went through ATAP, which is, again, when I took you back to the threat management unit of LAPD, once John Lane retired, he created this incredible network platform called ATAP, Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, that brought in the private sector and law enforcement together into one union, along with the mental health clinicians. Every year they have their annual training, they have quarterly training, and it's bringing people from all over the world actually attend this training in Anaheim. They have one in Florida, and then I just spoke at one in Switzerland for the European ATAP. That was so needed in the sense where John Lane realized over his years in law enforcement and the private sector is that we really need to communicate better and understand each other's functions, where law enforcement can be used, where the private sector is being utilized or can be used. We look at the recent stalking cases or break-ins of celebrity homes. All those could be different things, but it's all coming together. And I think Jennifer Aniston had some where the guy rushed the gate. Was there prior information that led up to that law enforcement should have been known or been privy to? At the same time, it's also important for the private sector to enhance or develop a relationship with the local law enforcement. So one, they look at us as being professional, and two, that it's a relationship that we can help each other out.
Just one more question on stalking from me until you answer it, and that'll lead to other questions, but this is how the show goes sometimes.
Sure.
Have you ever had a situation where the person being stalked baits the person stalking them so that they have something to call the police about and arrest them? Yeah, like an actionable thing?
I've never had that. I believe it's come up in investigations before. In one recent one, the victim had an opportunity to decide between myself as assisting them and being retained versus another investigator. And that investigator thought, I have a great way of stopping stalking. We'll stalk the stalker themselves. That can open up a lot for the victim. Although it's fun to entertain, the reality is it's so unprofessional. You have to do things the right way, and there's a reason for that. Baiting them openly, that's kind of a broad question. What What could be an example that you would think of to bait someone?
Knowing that the person would get extremely jealous if they saw someone out on a date with somebody and they knew, this is like their restaurant that they went to, and
Yes. Okay.
something like
I
that.
understand. Yes, I've had that come up before in a very specific case. We were trying to determine whether or not the suspect would know where they showed up based on maybe GPS tracking. I purposely met with the client at a restaurant, but I wouldn't tell her what restaurant. I didn't want anything. I wanted to protect it. I wanted to protect the integrity of it. Because if she told somebody that was linked to her ex, then I don't know for sure if they were being tracked, because we didn't find anything in the vehicle until after this. Then we determined that, yes, there could be something in the car. We found a cell phone stashed in between the seats, the back seat of the vehicle. In more direct with your question, I think if you plan something like that to bait them to see if they're going to, number one, do something, not in this particular case, but to see their reaction, you're opening up for a very dangerous situation, not just for you, the victim, but anyone else in that atmosphere, because something will happen and they're unpredictable. We're not predictors. We study human behavior. We look at past history, case studies, and experience, and all the data that we collect. And data is very important for assessing any type of threat.
How often does stalking lead to violence? And can you tell based on the type of the stalker, the arrangement, or is it kind of unpredictable?
It's a little of both. You're going to have some unpredictability on it because we're dealing with a human being, sometimes irrational human beings. You can't rationalize with someone like that. You do look at all the things we talked about before of trying to understand who is doing the stalking and everything about them, mental illness, criminal history. If they have, for example, every element we talked about, money problems, a recent loss of a job, and it's a male versus a female, they have statements of last resort type ideology, suicide ideology, homicide ideology, the level of threat increases and the likelihood of a violent act. That's why we categorize it low, moderate, or high threat. It's very important to get that right. We can't afford to make a mistake. According to Rhonda Saunders, the statement she made is, we can't afford to make a mistake, otherwise someone could lose their life. And that's so very true. Communication is also very important. If, Lance, you were being stalked, and I told you, I need you to communicate everything to me on this particular case. And even if you think it's ridiculous or you're just getting a bunch of hang-ups, but those hang-ups have increased in the last week, and you just think it's spam, I still need to know about it. Because I might look at that and go, okay, was it a number that was revealed? No, it was always blocked. Well, okay, now I'm going to have a little bit of concern. Are they building up to something? Is there an increase or a pathway to violence that we see? So there are stages that we look at, even in active shooter situations, workplace violence situations. Was there a pathway to violence? And in a sense, by managing, we talked about threat management, is managing that threat over a period of time, keeping the communication open, no matter how ridiculous you may have to either report a violation to the police or call me up and say, hey, look, I got another hang up today. That's good. Just let me know. That's my job, is to keep you safe. Predicting, we are not predictors. And we use forensic psychologists as well to help in all situations. I'll probably say it wrong, but it's a linguist that can study the writings or speech patterns too, that have assisted us in stalking cases, which is a whole other science. Not that it's needed every time, nor do we use our forensic psychologist every time. But if I come to a decision of a low, moderate, or high threat, but there's something there that is, I just want a second opinion because it's a little different, I'll reach out to our forensic psychologist and go, you need to look at this and give me your opinion on this and your expertise and experience.
That's really cool. So the linguist would look at something and say, based on the wording or like the tone, this is going to escalate?
Yeah, because that's a whole science altogether. It is amazing. And understanding those resources that you have that's available, and part of it is through the networking of ATAP. I've been so blessed and so fortunate to be around some incredible human beings in this industry, and showed me different things and their contacts. Again, Laura Petler, and what she offers in investigating cases. Those type of resources have been very valuable to me.
Have you ever followed stalkers in the act of stalking to document? Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes we do put them under surveillance. So there's a process, right? We just talked a small portion of what we do or the things that we may consider during a stalking investigation. We have done and placed a lot of stalkers under surveillance to watch them. When we don't, maybe we're trying to gather more information. What's their means of transportation? Do they live at the address that we found them? Do they communicate with anyone else? What's their daily routine, daily pattern? What if we follow somebody and they're going to a sporting goods store? That alone is nothing, but if it's Turner's where they sell weapons, we're going to be concerned, right? They go to a hardware store, nothing really out of the ordinary, but if they're buying duct tape and plastic and bleach, we might be looking at something more serious and heighten security, or actually initiate and the process of getting a restraining order. For documentation, again, restraining order is just a piece of paper. They violate it quite often, but it's once they violate it, the problem that we have is, one, getting the victim to consistently file a police report for every single violation. If they receive a phone call that violates the restraining order, they call the police, and 5 hours later get another. Don't write it off. Just file another police report. You're going to get pushback from the police, but once those violations are filed, then it goes to the court systems. The court's going to have to look at this and go, boy, this guy doesn't stop. So is jail or a fine or a mental health evaluation in order here? We've gone from misdemeanors to felony warrants for violations of the restraining order because the client listened to us and followed directions of filing the violations each and every time. And God bless them. There was one actress that did that during COVID. So it wasn't like the police came to her house. It was going to the station, filing a report every single time. And that resulted in getting I believe a 10-year restraining order, which is very, very uncommon. There's 1, 3, and if you're lucky, a 5-year restraining order. Actually, it was a 5-year restraining order. So those are still very hard to come by.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Okay, well, switching gears a little bit here. Thank you for all of that on stalking. I know we didn't even say that that's what we would talk about, but you just gave us
I love talking about it.
Yeah, and it's such a great education. That's what we try to do is clarify those things that we don't understand. To switch gears, you had sent us a couple of documents that represented a case that you recently worked on. They are so extensive, 480 pages each, or something to that extent.
Yes.
We did our best looking through them. We don't have that legal or law enforcement mind approaching them, but pretty amazing stuff. Do you mind going into that case?
No, not at all. Yeah, and one thing I do want to make for your listeners to understand about stalking, then I'll get right on that. I know I touched on it a little bit, is most law enforcement officers will say, just block them if you're getting harassed. We don't want that because they do write things down. They can't help themselves, right? Human nature. It's like, I'm coming to see you right now. You better be there. So those are building the case, and it's very important because it tells us the possibility of what it doesn't mean they're actually going to do it, but it definitely warns us that there might be some stalking, watching that person, movement, and travel involved, especially when they travel from one state to another. Getting back to your question, yes, there's a couple of cases that we're working. One right now is a missing person. Currently right now, it's been missing for over a year and a half, and then working with law enforcement in that aspect of it. In actuality, in these type of cold cases, we don't take every case that comes to our office. We do evaluate them. And in the one main one that was 500 pages, it was the client believed that her stepmother killed her father. In that case, I said, well, if you're serious about this, she lived in Florida. I go, you're going to have to come out here. So I'm measuring the client to see how serious they are about this. And a lot of times, just because they feel that these are things, they might have good reason to feel that way, but there's really nothing there for them to be investigated or even call the police about, just because a lot of times they didn't like each other and they were going to get a divorce and she got all the money. Well, that doesn't mean you're going to commit murder. But when she presented this to us, I remember spending hours with her, and I remember looking at it. There was a will involved, a very financial, wealthy individual, a high net worth individual, worth $300 million, successful business person, very stoic. When we looked at some of the paperwork she brought, I said, you know what? I cannot prove at this point even that there's a potential homicide here. What I can prove and look at and investigate first is the potential of the will being forged and the other vehicle documents. So we started doing that. When I started looking into that, and it just opened up Pandora's box into other avenues, there was good motive here, $300 million to kill somebody, number one. When you start interviewing various witnesses, you start learning and building a picture of who the victim was, who the potential suspect is. But you also have to look, when you investigate these cases, don't get tunnel vision on one person. Because if you get tunnel vision just because of it looks obvious, or you're only given information provided by your client, it's up to you to investigate it, to go get other sources to verify who they are. So I might run a background check on the people we're investigating, but I'm also going to run on my client to see what's there. If they present indications of greed, the woe is me card, they always kept me out, all these things that we would look at and consider going, hey, was it really that, or is it just a matter of circumstance? Even if the wife was greedy, doesn't mean, again, that she's going to resort to homicide, murder. That's a big step. And you see police do this all the time. Well, it doesn't mean that they murdered them. But when you start building a case and you look at all this stuff, you have to look at everything, and you also have to look at other people, potential, who else. And the coroner already wrote this person off as dying from a cardiac arrest. So is it really that? I mean, you're going against medical professionals, or is there something in there that was overlooked? And in that case, like I said, it kept opening up and going, well, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. I'm doing a case right now. To give you an example, I've been doing it for over 20 years. Being a police officer, it's not easy to do defense work, because we figure that if you went to jail and convicted by a jury of your peers and there's enough evidence presented, doesn't mean that it's 100% accurate. Even in murder cases where there's obviously the person did it, we don't know exactly what happened. We're speculating based on evidence and coming up with a hypothesis. And even a closing statement, they'll say, we believe this is what happened. In any case like this, we have to look at every aspect of it. In this particular case where the person was wrongfully convicted, I remembered the conversation with him. He called me from prison, and I actually took the call for a friend of mine who another investigator, doesn't do criminal defense work, but they knew I was a police officer, and it was for a friend of a friend, basically. And I said, okay, I'll talk to him. And I remember talking to the guy going, hey, look, as far as I'm concerned, you did it. If you're in prison, you did it. I'll look at the case. I'll look at the discovery and what you sent, and I'll give you my honest opinion. And was not expecting my mind to vary from that. When I read all the discovery and the information, I go, I can't believe this guy got convicted. If anything, I can't believe he got convicted on what they presented. This man should have another trial, a fair trial. And one of the key things that bothered me about that whole case, when I was reviewing the police reports, I called up the DA investigator. It was out of New Jersey. And I spoke to him on the phone. I said, hey, my name is Joe Dalu. I'm a retired police officer. I'm doing this case, and forgive me, it's a criminal defense case, and I don't really, think anything other than he's probably guilty. And he kind of chuckled a little bit. I go, I just got a few questions. And he goes, sure, what's up, Joe? I said, well, the victim was backing out of the garage. The state's evidence said that the suspect was lying in wait, which would be my client, potential client, around the corner from the garage. As the victim backed out, suspect came around the corner, shot 6 rounds with a revolver into the passenger side of a VW bus. He starts to flee. Now, the state believes he was a passenger of the vehicle he got into, and there was a getaway driver, and that was parked in front of the house. But the suspect realizes as the victim exits his vehicle, he's kind of stumbling around, still alive, drops to his knees. Suspect then empties his revolver, loads 2 rounds up, and then closes the revolver, runs up and shoots him in the back of the head and flees. He goes, so what's your question? I go, well, 2 questions. I'm amazed at when anyone's in a shooting like that, under stress, and they either put 2 rounds in, adjusted the cylinder just right so it would shoot when he pulled the trigger, or he got lucky and maybe he clicked it once and it was nothing and then clicked again. Who knows? We don't know that, right? But the empty shell casings were found 9 feet 1 inch from the curb line. He goes, so what's your point? I go, that tells me it's a driver. If it was a passenger, the empty shell casings would be on the sidewalk, even on the curb line. They wouldn't be in the middle of the street. That tells me it's the driver running to the car. And in his reply, a professional said, what can I say? Your fucking client's guilty, and hung up. So I called him back. I said, I believe we got disconnected. He said the same thing to me. And I said, if anything, I owe this person a real look at this investigation. And that's when I found a number of things, including a false police report from the witness said, I never said that. The same DA investigator that hung up on me falsified that report, and it was presented in evidence. And then I looked at evidence brought in from a wrongful death case in a civil that the wife, the widow, filed against a number of people. I found a police report in there that was omitted from discovery, exculpatory evidence, that said from a New Jersey state trooper that said, I have a confidential, reliable informant who stated that suspect 1 committed this crime, not my client. They slipped that through on the civil case, but they omitted it or failed to provide it that's exculpatory evidence. By law, he should have a trial, and that alone should give him a fair trial. What I've learned is how corrupt, and I hate to say it because being a police officer, there's some corruption in law enforcement, and it saddens me. But from the DA's office, I could see it's embarrassing. They have to expose. But a lot of this stuff, we're not here to play God. We're here just to find the facts. And that bothers me. So when I look at cases, and like the one that we talked about in the beginning that I sent you, I look at that reason why I understand everyone's lives that are affected by this. And making a big accusation that, yeah, I do believe that this person killed her husband. I'm going to present, hence what you guys got, something gift wrapped to law enforcement. Their job is to go, okay, they have to verify it. They can't just take my word for it. Basically, gift wrap this for them. And they put a lot of things. It went from Boca saying, well, we're not going to prosecute on the falsification or the forged documents of the vehicle titles or the will. Then I took it to South Carolina because that's where he was found dead. His business was in Florida. And that sheriff goes, you know what? I like your report. There's a lot here. Let me investigate it. At one point, he told me, hey, look, Joe, I'm getting a lot of pressure to let this go from my supervisor. Now, this is South Carolina, Beaufort County, where we had the Murdaugh case. We know the corruption. We know the cover-up, the good old boy thing. There is just some things you cannot ignore about that case that I've outlined, like the cause of death and based on a lividity that was documented in first responders reports based on what was on him, means that he was found in the prone position, but the lividity was on his back. How does that happen? You can't ignore science like that. Cover up after cover up. And at that point, we took it to the solicitor and said, this needs to be investigated. If anything, you guys, I would be happy and walked away if you did a legitimate investigation. I'd rather them come to me and go, we believe this was a homicide, 100%. But can we convince a jury? Is there enough evidence, circumstantial evidence, to get this? They have the means to find out scientifically. It's whether or not they're going to do it or not. That's what I have a problem with when things sit like that, get swept under the carpet. That doesn't mean cold cases are all like that. It just means sometimes you need a different set of eyes, right? So as an investigator, if I was training you guys and you come to me as analysis, and I'd say, what's the problem? I'm just having trouble. I know something's there and it's bugging me. I'm going down these rabbit holes. My advice to you is get up and walk away. Take a day or two. Come back and it's going to hit you in the face when you come back. And just because you see it one way doesn't mean that someone else can't. There's no one hero in investigating a case. It takes a team. But sometimes it takes one person to push it through so justice is served. And what you guys do, for example, is bring awareness to these types of cases that I think is so needed. The more you expose or bring some of these cases up, you have these keyboard warriors that sometimes, or online sleuths that are very good. And it takes them. How often do you hear some of the cases based on podcast that things are looked at again, to where agencies they'd be sitting there with egg on their faces. They just let it go by.
When you're told by other investigators, law enforcement, that they're getting pressure to let it go, within the legal parameters, what do you do then? Like, what's your next step?
That's a good question, and especially on this case. I will tell you, when I was told that, I wanted to continue to work with this deputy because I heard some good things about him. He's an investigator, a good investigator. For the most part, I still believe he is. The problem I have, at some point, people are so afraid of their jobs, losing their jobs, especially in law enforcement. There's a belief in it that if you lose your job in law enforcement, you're not going to get a second chance. And if you get a second chance, you're never, ever going to get a third chance. You can be blackballed very easily. Liability-wise, they're going to sit there and go, well, I don't want one bad egg. So it's tough on them. What I have a problem with is you're sworn by an oath to be honest and to investigate things. Then I have a problem with what he's experiencing. What I have a problem with him is giving into that, truly. And eventually to the point to where he said he was going to do certain search warrants, and he didn't. When he did do a search warrant, which he shared with me, the results, I said, why are you only doing one phone record? Why aren't you doing multiple phone records? Because this is what is needed. What I presented in this case, I gave you everything for you to write a search warrant that you're going to need to present to a judge. I don't care what agency, what county it is, there's enough there for any judge to sign. And it was probably laziness. Caseload is probably going to be part of it. Lack of resources. But that's his choice on the resources. They could go to SLED. They can reach out to outside agencies. He told me a lot about this case that he found based on medical. There is no way you can explain any other way. There's some questions on whether or not an autopsy was done. We just found new evidence based on photographs that was taken by the coroner. According to their report, it was taken the day after the autopsy, but the photos indicate, based on their metadata, like opposite of that. It was like, well, this is weird. Or they said it was taken the day of the autopsy, right after it, but there was no markings on it, so it was taken before. Or there was no evidence of the metadata showed that, well, it was taken afterwards. That means there was no autopsy. There's nothing indicating on that. They weighed the heart. They weighed the organs on that. So how could that be? This is something we just discovered on the metadata.
Is that something that you work with a lot, like the digital forensics of investigations?
We do. We want to be able to look at that. And just because, metadata has to be done and handled a certain way. Just because it says it, you have to make, okay, was it forwarded to us through a text message? You have to look at all those aspects of it. And then if we have any questions, we could send it forensically. Anything that we do, like even obtaining text messages for cases, we don't want them to copy and paste it because you're going to miss a lot of the content. We ask them to download it through a software that can protect it forensically or be some type of chain of evidence. A lot of times we'll do it ourselves and then we'll keep the phone. Or we'll make a forensic copy of it and then put it in our evidence locker. So if challenged, we can show that it was done properly forensically. We have experts that do that for us. That's their specialty. But we're finding between AI and everything that we're looking at in investigation, you really have to look at any investigation holistically. Have a holistic approach to it. Look at the possibilities. Some of the things that officers don't like to do, and you obtain the best information, are a lot of times neighborhood canvases. It's tedious. Ring doorbells. It's easy to say that, well, it's been too long. Well, you don't know that. They could still store it in a cloud. For DVRs, yes, the max you're going to get is maybe a month from storage before it overrides. So your time is limited. Don't be afraid to go and talk to neighbors, because you never know, you're going to get someone going, oh my gosh, we heard them arguing that night. It was so loud because they live behind them, but everyone in front, oh no, you're not going to hear it if you're in the front. Well, how would you know that if you didn't go to the neighbor and back? You have to be open and you have to have the resources and the help. And if not, if you're doing it by yourself, which in the private industry we do because they can't afford a team, then we do have to do our due diligence and beyond to really give them a good investigation that they're going to have some type of closure to it. Because sometimes if they believe in something, they're still not going to believe you no matter what evidence you produce. I at least like to walk away from that going, I know that I did everything I possibly inhumanly can. And if I overlook something, I'm the first one to go, oh, I never thought of that. Let's go back and take a look at that, because that's a good point. My daughter found a missing dog that we've been looking for 15 months. That was just based on good old-fashioned police work, investigative work, but also she simply took that case and posted it on social media. Within an hour, she got someone said, I know that guy. They're a band that opens up for a major A-list band. Well, once that got out, I got a call from the guy who had the dog and said, will you take that down if I give the dog back? I said, absolutely. We took it down immediately, got the dog back, reunited. But he told me something. In his defense, he thought the dog was neglected, and it wasn't. We were able to prove through veterinarian bills, but he never wanted to hear or see it before. That prompted him to open up a discussion afterwards, because he slammed the door in my face the first time before that post was done. And he goes, I didn't know the real story. And I go, all I asked you was just to listen. And that man got his dog back that he had for years and sent me pictures. He moved, and the two dogs were playing with each other, and he lived a year and a half longer, but he spent the last year and a half of his life with his dogs. That to me was a case that keeps me going. And sometimes those clients can be annoying as hell, because they'll call you up every day. Did you find anything out? Did you find anything out? Did you find anything out? It's like, no, I will call you. My daughter pushed me. We got to do more. We got to do more. And 15 months later, I find the dog. The attorney goes, I can't believe you found the dog. Neither can I. So investigations is skill, but it's also luck. It's also using other people and resources that you have, discussing it with people in your office, not getting so tunnel vision, not saying that I have all the answers or I know, being open to these things and listening to other people.
And is there any case that is sort of your white whale that you either have been working on forever or you'd like to work on and solve?
The one that I just told you about, the wrongful conviction, I believe. What did I say, 20, 25 years since I've been working on that. There's so much to that case and so many things that people would just look at and just go, it is unbelievable what we uncovered. There's that one. And there's a case I worked with Chris Smith, Ed Shin. I stumbled across this case moving into an office, and an office that I did not want. By the way, I liked working out of my house, staying small. I stumbled across this case. It was just to look for Ed Shin because he skipped out on his lease at the office building. And I found out later that the police was looking for his business partner, Chris Smith, because his parents filed a missing person case. We looked into that, and as I looked into it more, I learned the police closed the case. It was just a missing person, but the family was receiving emails from their son that was missing for 6 months, and then it just died out. I uncovered that the emails were not written by Chris, their son. It was written by Ed Shin. I found blood in the office and opened up the case, and we later convicted Ed Shin. Matt Murphy did a phenomenal job on convicting that and getting life without parole. And I did it pro bono. My office will kill me for saying that because it did get me a lot of calls after that. But they asked me why. Dateline asked me that question. I said, because the police should be doing this for free. The family shouldn't pay someone to do this. This is something the police could have handled, resolved, and they would have looked like an excellent department based on just giving it a little bit of effort and follow through. That's all that case took. It's really not rocket scientist. It was nothing more than just a little determination and asking questions and presenting it to the right law enforcement. Because we ended up getting another county sheriff's involved, and my stipulation on that was, if I give you certain information, let the sheriffs handle it from now, because I know they'll do a thorough job. And they did a great job, and we got a conviction on that. And there's a couple. There's one, a missing person, that I believe the parties involved is not just one, that the police is looking at just one person. I'm looking at two. It's still up in the air, but we still haven't found the person yet. I think it's going to be very tragic, and I think that the family's coming to that. There's enough there to bring certain people in for questioning, and there are certain things that they can do to locate the other person. It just depends on how much effort. You know, look at how many missing persons. I was amazed at CrimeCon how many missing persons there are. I had no idea. it's a lot more than we could ever imagine. Every one of those victims' families have a story, and it is worth bringing the attention and people looking at. So I think as long as there's human nature, as long as we're living in the world that we are, I'm always going to have those white whale type cases. They do come often, and it always seems to come at the right time when I feel like throwing my phone out the car window while I'm driving down the highway because I'm just tired of it, that someone will walk in the office. It doesn't take much effort, and we change their world forever in a positive way, at least in some closure or give them answers, that I walk away going, yeah, I guess we need to keep going and doing what we do.